When most people think of a narcissist, they picture someone obvious, loud, arrogant, the person who dominates every conversation, who makes everything about themselves, who you can see coming from across the room. But that's not who left you questioning your reality. That's not who made you feel responsible for their pain, who disappeared when you needed them most and had a perfect explanation for why, who never raised their voice, and somehow that made everything worse. The person who did that wasn't obvious at all. They were sensitive, self-aware, or so it seemed. They talked about their own flaws before you could notice them. They seemed to feel things deeply. And that, precisely that, is what made them so effective. Covert narcissism is one of the most misunderstood and most damaging personality patterns in close relationships. Not because it's rare, because it's invisible until you've already been inside it for years. This is what it actually looks like. Narcissism exists on a spectrum, and most people only recognize one end of it. The overt narcissist is what the word typically evokes. Grandiose, entitled, openly self-centered. They need to be the most important person in the room, and they make sure you know it. This type is disruptive and often immediately off-putting, which, paradoxically, offers a kind of protection. You can see the pattern early. The covert narcissist, sometimes called the vulnerable narcissist, operates differently. Same underlying need, constant validation, an inability to tolerate criticism, a fundamental belief that they are special and misunderstood. But the expression is inverted. Instead of arrogance, you see apparent humility. Instead of demanding admiration openly, they elicit it through suffering. Instead of dominating, they withdraw. Instead of claiming superiority, they position themselves as perpetual victims of a world that doesn't recognize their worth. The need is identical. The strategy is opposite. And because the covert narcissist looks nothing like the cultural image of narcissism, the people closest to them rarely name what's happening. They just feel its effects: confusion, guilt, exhaustion, a slow erosion of their own sense of reality, without understanding the source. There are 6 patterns that consistently define covert narcissism in close relationships. Each one looks like something else on the surface. That's the point. Pattern 1, fragile victimhood. The covert narcissist experiences themselves as someone the world has failed. Not occasionally, persistently. Every difficulty confirms their narrative of being uniquely burdened, uniquely sensitive, uniquely wronged. What makes this a pattern rather than simply a hard life is the function it serves. Victimhood provides an explanation for every failure, a demand for sympathy that cannot be questioned without appearing cruel, and, critically, a way to make others responsible for their emotional state. You can't hold someone accountable when they're already suffering, and they are always already suffering. Pattern 2, passive control, where the overt narcissist controls through force, demands, outbursts, explicit pressure. The covert narcissist controls through passivity, withdrawal, sulking, strategic helplessness, silence that communicates displeasure without ever stating it directly. This creates a dynamic where you are constantly trying to read the temperature of the relationship and adjust your behavior accordingly. You become the emotional manager. They never have to ask for what they want. You learn to offer it before they do, simply to avoid the cost of their withdrawal. Pattern 3, covert superiority. Despite the surface humility, the covert narcissist holds a deep belief in their own specialness. They just express it differently. Through chronic disappointment in others who don't meet their standards. Through subtle condescension dressed as concern. Through being the most self-aware, most sensitive, most misunderstood person in any room. They may describe themselves as failures, but the subtext is always that they are exceptional failures, undone by circumstances no ordinary person would have faced. Pattern 4, empathy that isn't. Covert narcissists often appear deeply empathetic. They talk about emotions constantly. They seem to understand pain. But there's a consistent asymmetry. Their empathy flows toward themselves, their pain, their needs, their narrative. When you're struggling, the conversation finds its way back to them. Your difficulty becomes a reminder of their difficulty. Your success becomes a subtle threat. It isn't that they feel nothing. It's that their emotional world is oriented entirely around their own experience, and everything else, including you, is processed in relation to how it affects them. At the core of covert narcissism is an intolerance of shame so severe that it drives the entire behavioral pattern. Any criticism, however gentle, however well-founded, is experienced as an attack on the self, not on a behavior, on the person, and the response is rarely direct anger. It's withdrawal, illness, depression, and escalation of victimhood that makes you regret having raised the issue at all. Over time, you learn not to raise issues. You learn to manage your own needs so carefully that you never trigger their shame response. You become a person who walks on eggshells, not because of threats, but because of the cost of their pain. Pattern 6. The slow reality erosion. Perhaps the most damaging effect of a relationship with a covert narcissist is what it does to your perception of yourself and reality over time. Because the control is never explicit, because there are no dramatic scenes you can point to, you doubt your own experience. You wonder if you're being too sensitive, too demanding, too much. You may have tried to describe the dynamic to someone outside the relationship and found yourself unable to explain what exactly was wrong. Because individually, each incident looks minor. It's the accumulation, the pattern across months and years, that becomes suffocating. And by the time most people recognize what's been happening, they've already spent years adjusting themselves to fit the needs of someone who was never going to be satisfied. Understanding why someone stays in a relationship with a covert narcissist requires understanding what the relationship actually feels like from the inside. It doesn't feel like abuse. It feels like a relationship with someone who is struggling, someone sensitive, someone who needs support, someone who clearly has depth and pain and complexity. There are moments of genuine connection, periods where they seem truly present, times where the relationship feels like everything you hoped it could be. These moments aren't fabricated. They're real, but they serve a function. They reset your experience, restore your hope, and ensure you stay invested enough to endure the next cycle. Leaving also triggers the most intense response. The withdrawal of attention, the escalation of victimhood, the profound fragility that makes walking away feel like cruelty. You weren't weak for staying. You were responding to a dynamic designed to make leaving feel impossible. Clarity in this context doesn't start with a confrontation. It starts with a recognition. The recognition that your discomfort in the relationship was information, not oversensitivity, not selfishness, not failure to be patient enough. Information about a dynamic that was consistently oriented around one person's needs at the expense of another's. Once that recognition settles, a few things tend to shift. You stop trying to be understood by someone whose understanding of you is filtered entirely through how you affect them. That's not a relationship failure. That's an accurate reading of what's available. You stop managing their emotional state as a way of managing your own safety. When their withdrawal or pain is no longer your emergency, the dynamic loses its grip, and you start rebuilding the parts of yourself that the relationship required you to minimize. Your needs, your perception of events, your right to experience your own emotional reality without immediately questioning whether it's valid. That last one takes time, but it's where the actual recovery happens. Covert narcissism is difficult to name because it presents itself as the opposite of what it is. Sensitivity instead of entitlement. Humility instead of arrogance. Victimhood instead of control. But the effect on the people who love them is consistent. Confusion. Exhaustion. A gradual disconnection from their own sense of what's real. If something in this description felt familiar, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived experience, that recognition matters. It's where the shift begins. Tell me in the comments if something in this landed for you. If you're trying to understand whether what you've experienced fits a pattern, the 2 tools in the description were built for exactly this. The red flags checklist gives you the patterns in 1 page. The 3 questions help you verify in real time what you're actually dealing with. Both are free. Both are in the description. The next video is about what happens after you recognize the pattern, when you decide to leave, or to stay differently, or simply to stop organizing your life around someone else's emotional needs. How that transition actually works, and what it asks of you. That's the next one. I'll see you there.